Chapter 5, Part 3. Nahari drew the flap down on his booth and came to sit with Amos. This was a very bad day. He rubbed his hands. Amos read the signs. What troubles you, Nahari? He already knew, but hoped having to voice it would cause Nahari to think longer. You used to draw crowds. Everyone wanted to hear what you had to say. Because the earthquake had aroused the fear of the Lord in them, within a year, though, it had lessened. Now it was all but forgotten. Nahari rubbed his palms over his tunic-covered knees and left damp spots. The people don't want to listen to you anymore, Amos. He shook his head. 3 years ago, even a year, and I would not worry, but times have changed. Despite what you claim, no one believes God had anything to do with the earthquake. It just happened. Amos said nothing, but his heart broke. Even Nahari was deaf to the word of the Lord. Even after all this time and hearing everything I've said, you fail to believe that God will bring judgment upon Israel? Why would anyone want to believe such a thing, Amos? Even if they did believe it, wouldn't that be all the more reason to eat, drink, and be merry? If death is coming and there's no way to stop it, then we must take all the pleasure we can now. Repentance. Nahari waved his hand impatiently. Yes, you've said that word 1,000 times. It rubs men raw, not raw enough. You should respect me more. What are you talking about? Amos stared at Nahari in confusion. I tried to warn you not to insult those women today, but you ignored me. He pointed to himself. Me, the one who gave you the use of this booth. Amos had never been fooled by Nahari's generosity. The merchant's motives had always been selfish. You made this booth so that I would draw a crowd and you could sell your sandals. Nahari's eyes flashed. Even so, you should thank me. Instead, you caused trouble. Did you have a single thought for me or my business when you insulted those women? Fat cows, you called them. And so they are. No, say no more. Not another word. You've said too much already. You never think of the consequences, do you? You just keep pointing your finger and making accusations and pretending you know everything that will happen. He stood. You are bad for business, and I want you to go away now. Amos stared at him. He had hoped to reach these people and had not reached even one. Nahari had boasted once that he did not bow down to a golden calf. True enough, he'd never given up bowing down to prophets. Weary, Amos took his staff. He looked at Nahari. I had hoped. Tears welled in his eyes. Shaking his head, he walked away. Nahari called after him. I like you, Amos, his tone filled with uneasiness. I mean no disrespect to you or your God, but a man has to make a living. You have chosen, Nahari. One day, sooner than he thought, death would be at his door. As Amos walked through the streets of Bethel, he looked for faces into the faces of people. Despite their sin, he had come to love them. They were like a flock of sheep, dumb and prone to wander, ignorant of the dangers that lurked everywhere, oblivious to the enemy Satan who longed to devour them. They followed their desires, foraging into foreign religions that fanned their pride and base passions. They thought they could live without God's rules and make up their own, but they couldn't even seem to understand that every man cannot live for himself without bringing chaos. The very things they longed for were within reach if only they would return to God. The love that God offered them each would fulfill the longing of their souls, while the love offered in the temple of Bethel would leave them empty and diseased. The freedom God offered would build them up and give them purpose, while the freedom offered by idols would captivate and enslave them. They wanted fair treatment, and they would have that if they obeyed the law of God. Instead, they bowed down to man-made rules that gave corrupt men power to grind the poor beneath their heels and grow rich upon others' labors. Their hearts were like stone, impenetrable. They wore the armor of pride. Anguish filled Amos. He had seen their end. Crying out, he wept and tore his robe. Come, let us tell of the Lord's greatness. Let us exalt his name together. I prayed to the Lord, and he answered me. He freed me from all my sins. Those who would look to him for help will be radiant with joy. No shadow of shame will darken their faces. The Lord will set us free from fear. His words fell on deaf ears, for they had lost their fear of the Lord. Earthquakes came and shook their confidence, but when the rubble was cleared away, the warning was forgotten, and they returned to their old ways. Listen, you people of Israel, Amos cried in anguish. Listen to this funeral song I'm singing. His voice rose in a sad lament to the virgin Israel's fall from grace, never to rise again. He sang of her lying abandoned on the ground with no one to help her up. People came out of their houses, peered down from their windows, paused in their work to listen, for his voice was like that of the Lord, beautiful and terrible at the same time. His song echoed in the gates and then drifted on the wind as he left the city and walked slowly, shoulders slumped, to his cave. And the people talked among themselves. I hope he never comes back. Wish he would just go away. Someone should go up there and shut him up for good. He never has anything good to say, not to us. Doom and gloom, that's all he's about. All he ever does is tell us what he thinks we're doing wrong. Amos sat inside his cave, head in his hands, shoulders shaking with sobs. Oh, Lord, oh, Lord. Turn their hearts to soft clay, Lord, please, Lord. But he already knew the answer. The people had turned away. Their hearts were hardened. And God was storing up wrath for the day to come. And that's the end of chapter 5.